This morning we have the great privilege to hear from different scholars as well as people who knew Rabbi Sacks very well on different perspectives on his philosophical and hashkafic perspectives, as well as on the personal, as well as on the communal perspective as a leader of rabbis and a leader of a community, and in many ways a world leader. So we'd like to start this morning by hearing from Dr. Tamra Wright, who was for many, many years the Director of Academic Studies and Educator Development at the London School of Jewish Studies. She's now a curriculum advisor at Faith and Leadership, which is a program run out of Oxford University. She also continues to be involved with the London School of Jewish Studies. And it's really a pleasure to ask her to share her insights on the contributions and the perspectives and hashkafat olam of Rabbi Sacks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Helfgott. It really is an enormous honor to speak at this event in memory of Rabbi Sacks Zatzal. And I'm not sure if you remember, Rabbi Helfgott, but when you emailed me to ask me to speak today, you got a response almost immediately. And I'm not an inbox zero person, and I'm not famed for my rapid responses to email, but I looked it up and there were 8 minutes between receiving the email, asking if I would speak, and sending out the response saying that I would be honored to do so. So really, genuinely, thank you very, very much for that. And also, I have some prepared remarks. But in the introductory chat moments, it made me realize, first of all, that I feel very much amongst friends. And secondly, it seems to me that many, if not the majority of people with us right now, are on the other side of the pond, as we say. So I'd like to actually just reflect for a couple of minutes on the great cultural exports from Anglo Jewry to America. And I'm very, I might be idiosyncratic in my choices, but I'm going to tell you my top 3. And so my top 3, there are 2 people and 1 organization. One person is Dr. Aviva Gottlieb-Zornberg. An organization is Limud. And of course, I really think of Rabbi Sacks as, amongst many other accolades, the most recognizable and the most iconic cultural export of Anglo Jewry, the gift of Anglo Jewry to the rest of the world. Now, I'm not British, I'm Canadian, but somehow, I've been here long enough, so I take a certain amount of pride in all 3 of those achievements. And then just a quick footnote to what you said about, and I remember when you spoke at Elul in 2003, the program does continue, but we have come to rely much less on inviting international speakers and rely much more on our own local homegrown talent, of which, thank God, there's quite a lot. So yes, and this year, of course, Elul was entirely online, and what will happen next year, who knows? Okay, so what I want to do is begin to think about Rabbi Sacks's contribution to philosophy and to Jewish thought. And obviously, it is much, much too soon to assess, to truly assess his contribution, not least because such a contribution cannot be measured merely on the basis of his published works. It would be at least as important, if not more so, to look at the effect that Rabbi Sacks's teaching and writings have on future generations of thinkers. And I believe that that will be a very significant impact. And I'm already aware, have been for several years, of younger scholars who are writing PhDs and very much engrossed in his work and teasing out from the vast corpus some very important philosophical and theological observations and ideas that Rabbi Sacks himself didn't necessarily have the time to explore in an extended way. So thinking about that, I would basically say, watch this space. Okay, I think we're going to see a lot more coming out. And having said that, what I'd like to do is to share with you 3 memories of Rabbi Sacks, which have been foremost in my mind in recent days, and which for me provide helpful touchstones for considering his unique contribution both to philosophy and to Jewish thought. And in the course of doing so, we might find ourselves rethinking what do we mean by philosophy. Okay, so now for a trip down memory lane. And Rabbi Helfgott, I know that you've been to Hendon. We're going to talk a little bit about Hendon. And I'm going to tell you that I first met Rabbi Sacks when I was a PhD student in the late 1980s. I was writing a dissertation on Emmanuel Levinas, and I had just moved to London. And one of my new friends who was studying for an MA at what was then called Jews College, not the London School of Jewish Studies, strongly encouraged me to audit the course on Jewish ethics that she was taking. So I looked up the address of this college in my London A to Z, and I set out for my first class. The closer I got to my destination, the more concerned I became. As I turned the corner into Albert Road and looked down this tiny street of terraced houses, I thought that there must be some mistake. Where on earth could a college be hiding in this little residential street? Well, rest assured, I found the place set back from the road and housed in a former shoe factory. The class in Jewish ethics was taught by the principal, Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sacks. Back then, he wasn't the chief rabbi, he wasn't a professor, he wasn't a lord. In fact, he wasn't even a published author. The first of his authored books, as opposed to edited collections, did not come out until 1990. Back in the 80s, in those days, his office in the college was a small windowless room tucked away in a corner, just as the college itself was, and indeed still is, tucked away in this little corner of Hendon, northwest London. And as I found out later, his home office, the place where he did his thinking and his writing, was actually a shed at the bottom of his garden. I'm sure you can imagine what a pleasure and indeed what a privilege it was to be a part of a small group studying secular moral philosophy and contemporary Jewish ethics with Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sacks every week for a year. And I'm sure you know enough about human nature to realize that we couldn't fully appreciate the true extent of that privilege at the time. It was still a few years before Rabbi Sacks was appointed to the chief rabbinate, and well before his teaching and writing propelled him to something resembling rock star status in the Jewish world and beyond. His first book, Tradition in a Non-Traditional Age, was published in 1990, and it was followed by some 30 further titles, an average of one per year. Impressed as we all are by this prodigious output, I'm even more intrigued by the decades that led up to it. Rabbi Sacks reportedly suffered from writer's block for 20 years. No doubt that was very frustrating and painful for him, but when I think of those years, a well-known saying comes to mind: think much, speak little, and write less. The first of those injunctions is surely the core of a philosopher's job description, which reminds me of a story my friend Professor Howard Wetstein once told me, one that I'm sure Rabbi Sacks would have appreciated. Back in the days before individual screens were a feature on long-haul flights, a philosophy professor was staring intensely at the seats in front of him. The professor's wife, who was traveling with him, asked him a question. "Shh," he replied, "can't you see I'm working?" What is a philosopher? Etymologically, as is well known, the word is derived from the Greek and means something like lover of wisdom. Rabbi Sacks was certainly an exemplar of the philosopher in that sense. In fact, the relationship between Torah and Chokhmah, between Judaism and secular wisdom, became a central preoccupation of his thought. He read widely and deeply, and he delighted in bringing recent developments in psychology, economics, political philosophy, sociology, and so forth into dialogue with Jewish texts and teachings. In fact, he argued that it was an imperative to do so. In The Dignity of Difference, he wrote, "Because the God of creation is also the God of revelation, there is ultimate harmony between them. Even though, given the imperfections in our understanding of both, it may not be evident at any given moment. There must, I believe, be an ongoing conversation between them, for otherwise Torah will remain a closed system with no grip, no purchase, no influence on the world outside its walls." This is the central idea that Michael Harris, Daniel Reinhold, and I drew upon when we edited Radical Responsibility, a collection of essays presented to Rabbi Sacks on the occasion of his retirement from the Chief Rabbinate in 2013. We sought contributions not only from experts in Jewish studies, but also from leading scholars in the fields of moral philosophy, leadership studies, and political philosophy, people whom Rabbi Sacks had quoted extensively in his teaching and writing. We knew we had succeeded because when he was presented with the book at the launch, he exclaimed, "I love this. It has all my heroes in it." His love of wisdom extended well beyond the realms of academic scholarship. In paying tribute to him, many people have quoted Ben Zoma's teaching that the wise person is one who learns from everyone. In his recent book, Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times, which was published only this year, we are offered a glimpse of some of the slightly lower brow reading material on his bookshelves. He wrote, "I am, I admit, a long-time devotee of self-help books. I have felt the fear and done it anyway. I have refrained from sweating the small stuff. I've experienced the life-changing magic of tidying. I know the power of now. I'm okay and you're okay. And I no longer sit worrying who moved my cheese." In this vein, what surprised me most was discovering that Rabbi Sacks had read Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week, shortly after publication, and he had even recommended it to family members. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, the subtitle of this book was "Escape the 9-to-5, Live Anywhere, and Join the New Rich." Wow, I found myself wondering whether Rabbi Sacks and Lady Elaine were hoping to start an internet business and become digital nomads. Fortunately for all of us, that didn't seem to be on the cards. Rabbi Sacks' openness, and indeed his passion for identifying and absorbing new knowledge and wisdom wherever they could be found, was closely linked to other key elements of his thought. In one of his many memorable phrases, and alliterative phrases that he was so fond of, he espoused the dignity of difference. Now, the degree to which he was genuinely a theological pluralist will no doubt be debated in scholarly and religious circles for some time. But whether one takes the original version of dignity of difference, which I have on my shelf, or the revised one as the definitive text, it is clear that Rabbi Sacks espoused what I would term epistemological humility, an acute awareness that humans, by their nature, can have only a partial grasp of truth. In quite a famous passage in The Dignity of Difference, he quoted the Midrash Rabbah, which has God taking truth and throwing it to the ground. Rabbi Sacks commented, "For life to be livable, truth on earth cannot be what it is in heaven. Truth in heaven may be platonic, eternal, harmonious, radiant, but man cannot aspire to such truth, and if he does, he will create conflict, not peace. Men kill because they believe they possess the truth while their opponents are in error. In that case, says God in the Midrash, throwing truth to the ground, let human beings live by a different standard of truth, one that is human and thus conscious of its own limitations. Truth on the ground is multiple, partial. Fragments of it lie everywhere. Each person, culture, and language has part of it. None has it all. Truth on earth is not, nor can it aspire to be, the whole truth. It is limited, not comprehensive, particular, not universal. When two propositions conflict, it is not necessarily because one is true and the other false. It may be, and often is, that each represents a different perspective on reality, an alternative way of structuring order. In heaven, there is truth. On earth, there are truths. Therefore, each culture has something to contribute. And similarly, the morality book highlights a range of different types of morality that have been prominent in different cultures and different ages. Drawing on the work of a number of scholars, he looks at the contrast between the thin morality of liberal individualism and the thick morality of reverence and respect, We don't have time to go into those terms, but rest assured, those are technical philosophical terms, thick and thin. He surveys 4 broad types of moral tradition: civic ethics, the ethic of duty, codes of honor, and the morality of love. And then he discusses 3 types of moral personality: tradition-directed, inner-directed, and other-directed. But all these alternatives do not necessarily lead to the conclusion that morality is a matter of subjective choice. Rather, morality can be thought of as similar to human languages. He writes, "None of us at any given moment stands poised between the 6,000 languages spoken today, free to choose between them. We may be multilingual. We may acquire a small vocabulary to help us on a foreign trip. But for most of us, there is one language in which we think and can best express ourselves." And since language exists for the purpose of communication, and communication involves a listener as well as a speaker, we are constrained by our human environments. We need to speak in such a way as to be understood. That means that we need to live in a community of fellow speakers of the same language. We may use language to express our innermost feelings, but that language has rules of syntax and semantics, and we must obey them if we are to communicate effectively. Now, in the same way that seeing all human truth as partial enables us to value the contributions of other individuals and cultures, Rabbi Sacks argues in the Morality book that a mature understanding of the many ways there are of organizing a society and a life should make us more tolerant of the people not like us. Morality for Rabbi Sacks is a language, but it's a language of deeds. And just as we need to commit to speaking a recognizable human language if we want to be understood, we also need to commit to a morality, a language of deeds, if we want to find meaning, depth, and resonance in our lives. Out of the many varieties of morality available, there is one that is ours, and we do not have to denigrate the others to make that one our own. This is one of the key ideas that we find in many places in his work. I can be steadfastly and passionately committed to my faith, my truth, my moral perspective, without the need to delegitimate or denigrate that of others. Leadership scholar Ronald Heifetz, one of the contributors to Radical Responsibility, uses the metaphor of getting on the balcony. The metaphor is that of a ballroom. By leaving the dance floor and retreating to a place where one can observe the action and look for patterns, a leader can take a step back and ask, what's really going on here? I believe that Rabbi Sacks was particularly skilled at getting on the balcony. The subtitles of some of his most important works, How to Avoid the Clash of Civilizations, Confronting Religious Violence, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times, amongst others, are indicative of the way in which he was able to look to the bigger picture of what was going on, both in the Jewish world and in contemporary society. I also think that his dual commitment to and deep immersion in both Torah and secular wisdom provided him with vantage points from which each could be used to gain insight into the other. Going to the balcony and looking at Judaism as just one of the many faiths on the dance floor enabled him to embrace pluralism without in any way diluting his own Torah commitments. The second memory that I wanted to share is a story that will no doubt be familiar to many of you. Rabbi Sacks often spoke about a transformational journey he undertook as an undergraduate, traveling to America to meet with some of the leading rabbis of the generation and to put his questions to them. As I have read and reread some of his writings in the last few weeks, I've come to appreciate that familiar story in a different way. I believe that one of Rabbi Sacks's great gifts as a teacher and writer is that he never forgot what it was like to be that young, questioning student, nor did he ever lose sight of how crucial young people are to the Jewish future. It seems to me that when Rabbi Sacks sought to articulate Jewish ideas, he was always conscious that any arguments that he put forward would need to bear up to the scrutiny of a younger generation exposed to a wide range of influences, from deconstruction and postmodernism to the latest trends on social media. The final memory that I want to share with you is from the TED conference in Vancouver in April 2017. Sadly, I wasn't actually there, but I had done the next best and much cheaper thing, and I had booked tickets for a cinema screening of the talks. We had been told that Rabbi Sacks would be the first speaker, but there was a late change to the program, and in fact, he spoke last. And what a finale it was. You may have seen the talk online. It has been viewed over 2 million times, and not all of those were me in the last 2 weeks preparing for this talk. But there are two things you wouldn't know unless you'd been there or you'd seen the sort of simulcast in the cinema. First, from the moment Rabbi Sacks took to the stage, it was clear that this talk was going to be different. Unlike all of the other speakers, he had no props, no audio visuals, no shtick, as it were, just the power of his personality, his voice, and his message. And it was a message that had needed to be very carefully crafted indeed, because TED is explicitly not a forum for talking about religion. The second thing that we were able to observe in the cinema that is not obvious on the YouTube video is the reaction of the audience. And Joanna Benarosh, who runs Rabbi Sacks's office, was very helpful to me despite being so busy this past week. And I shared with her what I remembered and what I had observed watching this film in the cinema, and she reinforced my memory of it. So what I have to say comes with the authority also of Joanna, to whom I'm very grateful for her inputs. And I want to also add, I scribbled in notes, Rabbi Helfgott, when you were speaking about putting on a suit and tie to go visit the chief rabbi, that TED has a more relaxed dress code. And Joanna said, they said, everything in your talk at the rehearsal is wonderful, Rabbi Sacks, but would you please lose the tie? And Rabbi Sacks responded by saying, I've looked at every element of the dress code and I am complying. I'm not wearing dangly earrings and this whole list of other things he's not doing, but basically the tie stays. So it was actually, part of the kind of iconography of the image that you had of this man in a suit with a beard and a large kippah taking to the TED stage after all the kind of pyrotechnics of the fantastic talks that we saw. They were each was a masterpiece of its type, but you could just feel the kind of anticipation in the audience of what is this rabbi in a suit going to tell us? What is he going to say? Okay. So what I want to talk about is the second thing is the reaction of the audience. Unsurprisingly, and we're all familiar with Rabbi Sacks's strengths as an orator and the jokes that he tells and the way he gets people to come along with him. So unsurprisingly, within a minute or two, he had them eating out of his hands. And the standing ovation he received as he finished was clearly genuine. Again, I checked this out with Joanna. They didn't do that for everybody. The standing ovation was a real sign that the audience had indeed been deeply moved. Now, I'm not going to tell you what he said. That's your homework. You can watch the video. But I will conclude with two brief ideas about what philosophy in general and Jewish philosophy in particular should be. We've already talked about Rabbi Sacks as a deep thinker who embodied the love of wisdom. But I haven't yet described the task of a specifically Jewish philosopher. And for that, I turn to the work of Emmanuel Levinas, a thinker whom Rabbi Sacks admired greatly, although he never became a self-possessed Levinasian. Levinas taught that philosophy needs to transcend the love of wisdom and to become, in his phrase, the wisdom of love at the service of love. And according to Levinas, the specific task of Jewish philosophy is to translate the Bible into Greek, to convey the ethical teaching of Judaism in a universal language accessible to all. Rabbi Sacks's TED Talk, like so much of his remarkable body of work, is a masterclass in precisely that. That April night in the cinema, I was reminded that it is not only teachers who take great pride in their best students, but the reverse is also true.